Let's move on to CSS variables. CSS variables are very useful. Imagine a large project, if you will, and we have a hexadecimal color code, as you see here for our body element. And I've had to use this code twice just inside of this body element. But imagine in a large project where we have had to apply this color code many times throughout the project. And then our boss says he wants to change that color in the project. We would need to go through and find every instance of this hexadecimal code and change it. But when we use CSS variables, we would only need to change this hexadecimal code in one place. And that's what makes them so useful. Let's see how this is accomplished. And you can see we just have a basic page here with a header, nav, main area, and a footer. And we're going to refactor some of this using CSS variables. So let's start out by putting in a comment for our variables. So I'm just going to copy this reset comment, and right underneath it, I'll paste it and change this text to variables. And now we're going to put our variables inside of a pseudo class that you may not have seen yet, and that is the root pseudo class. Everything inherits from that. That is referencing the document root. So the HTML tag would even inherit from this root pseudo class. So we put it at the top. And now we can define variables inside that will apply everywhere in the project. We're going to start out with color, because if you do not use variables for anything else in CSS, it makes much sense to use them for colors. Now we start out by naming a variable, and they all start with two hyphens or two dashes, if you will. Now you can name them in upper or lowercase. I prefer uppercase. I am a developer, and overall we usually name static values in JavaScript and other programming languages with uppercase. They're referred to as constants. So I kind of like to see them in uppercase, and that tells me as a developer the definition for this variable is probably near the top of the file as a constant. And so that's how I remember it. You do not have to do it that way, but I'm going to use all uppercase today for these variable names. So for our background color, let's just pull what we have inside of our project already. We have this hexadecimal code. I will copy, and then I'll put in the hashtag and put in the code. And now we have created a variable for the background color. Now to apply this in the rest of our CSS, instead of the code here, we're going to use a small function that's available in CSS called var, and then parentheses, and then we put in our variable name. And it's as simple as that. Now we will still have that background color, and we can copy this, and we can also use it here or anywhere else in the page that we're using that color code. And once we save, I'm going to go ahead and go live. I did not have live server serving this page, so we should see it again. And now it looks the same because we applied this variable. You will see if I remove this, Control X just to cut it out temporarily, and I guess I didn't change our background color here. I should remove, because that is the fallback. So let me switch this to black just quickly, and now I'll go ahead and remove this and apply, and we can see it's black. And that's all I wanted to show you, was that the variable is applying. And so we're using the background color actually as a fallback to this background image statement that's using a radial gradient. But we want both there. So I'm going to replace black once again with our variable and save. And that's how we're applying now the background color saved in this variable. Okay, now let's do the next one. So I'm going to name this alt, once again capitals here, alt BG color. And now let's find our alt BG color, where we had a little darker color down here. And here it is, our background color for the header and the footer. So I can go ahead and Control X to just cut that out. Notice it doesn't take the hashtag, so we'll have to put that back. But now I'll put the hashtag, the color code, and now we have our alt background color. So we can just copy this variable, and we can scroll down to where that was for the header and the footer, I believe. There it is. And we'll put in, of course it needs to be in the var function, and put parentheses around it and save, and we still have that same background color. Now notice we're using white smoke in more than one place, and then we used white down here, but white smoke would also be sufficient. So if we wanted to go ahead and replace this with white smoke, it will still look about the same, and it does. So now we should create a variable for the white smoke as well, but we're using it in two different spots. We're also using it as a radial. So if we want to remember that, it's okay to go ahead and create two variables that have the same value. And that's what I'm going to do right now. So I'll have a radial color. So anywhere in my project that I will use a radial gradient, I might want to use this white smoke. But then I'm also just going to have a light color for parts of the page, and I'll use white smoke there too. But it would be weird if I put radial color in another part of the page. I might be able to get away with putting light color in as part of that radial gradient, but I just wanted to show this example that you could use two variables and they could have the same value, and it's okay to do that. So let's go ahead and copy this radial color variable first. And actually, before copying that, I want to show you something else about using a var function and how we can type this out and how Visual Studio Code will help you. So now we have our var with the parentheses. If I start to type the two hyphens, notice VS Code gives me a list of the variables that we've created already. So that's very handy, and it even gives you their values over here to the right. I'm just going to choose radial color and use it in my radial gradient. And once again, nothing is changing. So if we're making the conversions right and refactoring our page, we shouldn't see changes. It should continue to remain as it is over here. Now let's go ahead and replace any area that has white smoke, and I can press Control F and just search for white smoke, and it says there's 3 of 4. So we have 4 actual instances. So now I'm going to say var parentheses dash dash and choose light color, and that will also be our white smoke value. So now I can select white smoke, press Control D to select the other instances, but notice 2 of the instances are the value that we have in our variables, so we don't want to replace those. So let's just find the one that we do want to replace, which is the background for the nav, and now paste that in and save. Our project continues to look good. And now you can see we're also using the color black here for text in the nav, for the bottom border for the nav, and maybe in other places in the project as well. So let's go ahead and create one more variable, and that will just be our dark color for our color theme. And that's what I'll name it. And here we'll just put in the hexadecimal code for black. And now that we have that, we can find other places that are using that code and replace it. So we'll once again do Control F. I'll paste in that value, and it says 2 of 3. So these are the only 2 actually. The third one would be our variable above. So we need that, then type var, now dash dash, and it is our dark color. Now I'll copy this and simply replace the code down here with that. And we have replaced it as well. Now notice for the border, we still have 2 pixels solid, and then we're just providing the var for the color value. We can also use CSS variables for far more than just colors. So let's scroll back up to the top and look in our body element, and we see a font property here first, and this is a shorthand because we're supplying not only the font size, but we're also supplying the font family. So let's define a couple of variables, and we can use both in the same definition here. So as we come up to the top again, inside of our root, I'm going to put slash, and here I'm going to put font for our comment. And now for the first variable, I'll do 2 dashes and FF for font family. And then we can just copy the value we have here, which is Nunito with the fallback sans serif. So I copy that, I'll bring it up to our variable, and we've added that. Now I'll do 2 more dashes and an FS, a capital FS, for font size. And here I'll put 1.5 rem. And then in case we want a larger font size somewhere, I'm going to put in an FS-XL for an extra large font that we may use somewhere later. And I can put 3 rem for it and save. And now we've defined our font family, font size, and font size extra large. So let's put the font family and font size to work right away. And we can do that here. So we'll put a var variable, or a var function actually, and now we can pull our variable from our list, and this is font size. Then we'll highlight the font family, put another var, 2 dashes, and we'll highlight the font family variable there, and save, and it should look the same. Now, as you may be gathering, we're not limited as to what we can put in these variables. So it's not limited to the font or the color. We can also use it for other things. Let's quickly scroll down and take a look at our nav area here. You can see we have the light color, the dark color, and the dark color again used as a border. But then we have a padding here of 0.5 rem, and we could possibly also add a property or two here. So let's start with the padding, and let's define that above as a general style, because we could give this padding to other parts of the page as well in a project. So I'll just put general here, and then we'll do 2 dashes and do padding, and we'll put in our 0.5 rem, lowercase rem. There we go. Save that, quickly scroll down to the nav and apply that as well. So instead of the 0.5 here, we'll be using a var, parentheses, 2 dashes, choose padding from the list. That's good. Now what if we wanted to apply a shadow? So let's look at how to apply a shadow. We'll use a box shadow property, and here we're looking at an X offset for the first value, which I'll put in as 0, a Y offset for the second value, and I'm going to put in 6 pixels for that. And then there is a blur value, which I'll put in 5 pixels, and then there is a spread value, and I'm going to put in -5 pixels here. And what this does is essentially creates a shadow right underneath. You could provide an X and Y and have the shadow off to the right and underneath, or coming from another direction. If you're picturing the sun overhead, essentially that's what this shadow is going to create, because it should come straight down. Okay, after supplying that, then we also need to have a color, and we already have a dark color. So let's put in the var and -- dark - color and save. And if we look at our nav now, it has a nice little shadow right underneath the bottom line. I could try to make this bigger so it stands out. Let me put it like 15 pixels. And there we see the big shadow underneath. But that's not what we want. We want just a subtle shadow, and we can save that. But what if we wanted to use this shadow in other parts of the project also? So maybe we should just highlight that, or we could highlight all of this, and that's what I'm going to do. And I'll copy that and then bring it up here under our general styles that we have for our variables, not the general styles underneath. And here I'll put shadows, because it would look kind of strange to have the shadows coming from different directions, as if there was more than one sun looking at your project. So having the shadows fall all in the same direction makes sense. And then we can define shadows using another variable. And that's okay. We've defined this variable above it, and it knows what it is, and there we're putting it in. And this definition is completely legitimate. So we'll save that, and then we'll scroll back down to our nav and just bring in our shadows variable for the whole thing. So I'm going to delete that much and then change what we have here to our shadows variable and save. And the shadow still applies. Now we could use this same concept for our borders as well. So this is a border bottom, but we've also just defined borders before, and it uses this same structure. So let's just take this value, which is 2 pixels solid and the dark color, copy that, and create a borders variable above as well, just underneath shadows. And I want all caps again. And then we'll put in that value, and it uses the dark color variable, We can save that and then come back down once again to the nav, and where we have the borders, we'll just put in that value, and it will only apply to the border bottom as we define it here. So here's our borders and save. Now let's move to the HTML file. I'm going to close our find window as well. It's time to add some extra content to our main area of the page. So I'm going to scroll down to the main area, highlight the H2 we have, hit backspace to remove that, and I want to put in 12 divs. So I'm going to type div, I want lowercase here, div, and then dot, and I'm going to name the class that applies to all 12 divs square. So now we have div.square, and then with an Emmet abbreviation, I can type times 12 and press tab and instantly have 12 divs. Now that I have that, I have no content inside the divs. So I'm going to select the last one, which is just the closing tag for the div, and then we can go to, I believe, the edit menu, and let's find, no, it might be the selection menu. There it is. And let's find select all occurrences. And that is Control, Shift, and L. Control D selects the next occurrence, but the combination of Control, Shift, and L will select all, or you can just select it here from the selection menu. So now we've selected all of those, and I'm going to press the left arrow key to go to the beginning, and I'm going to paste in an emoji I have of a laptop. And I want that in the last, well, I guess the last 11, number 2 through 12. The very first one, I'm going to put in a paragraph and just put the word hey in so we see something different. And if we save that, you can see we have hey and then 11 laptops. After that, I'm going to come down to, let's say, the 8th one, right about here. And I'm also going to put in square dash dash, not important, let's do highlight, because we just might want to apply another class to one of these divs. And you can see I have my code wrapping, so this line wraps down to the next line. But that is the change we are making to the HTML. We'll make all other changes now back in the CSS. I'm going to scroll up just a little bit. If you'll notice, the header, nav, main, and footer all have these values, and the display is grid. I no longer want that for the main element, so I'm going to remove the main element from that and save, and you can see our content is now stacked on top of each other as divs or block elements, one on top of each other on the far left. So now let's move down to the main area and apply some more styles here. Right now, main is just a flex item in the larger flex container that is the body element, but we're going to make it a flex display as well, or I should say display flex. After that, let's justify the content and space dash evenly, and then after that we can align items, and we'll align the items to the center. If we save, we have definitely seen our flex items inside the main now change. Let's change flex dash flow to row and then wrap if it needs to. Now let's add a gap, and I'm going to use the min function here that will pick the smaller of whichever of these values. So I'll say 4 viewport units or 15 pixels. So whichever would be smaller, it will use for the gap. And remember, gap is shorthand for row gap and column gap as well. Okay, now let's put a padding value, and I'll put it up here above. And I'll just say padding, and I want 10 pixels on the top and bottom, but 0 on the left and right. And this is different than the padding variable we applied. You could have other parts of your project that have different padding, but if you know there's a value you will reuse more than once, then it's also a good time to declare a variable for that. Okay, now that we've defined those things for the main, we won't see a huge change here because we haven't defined our class for the square yet. Now, what we have done previously is take the code that I had and extract those values into variables, and I often do that when I'm designing something. However, now I know what variables I want to use, so I'm just going to write them at the top for the square, and then we will come down and define the class for the square. But just know this is a little backwards. Typically, I would probably define them first and then extract them like we previously did for these other variables. Okay, for the square, we have a couple of variables to create, and the first one is going to be dash dash square. We'll start all of them out with that, and let's do the background color. Here I'm going to choose papaya whip, and that's kind of a cool name for a color. After that, we will go with square once again, and then dash, not a space, just a dash, and size. Now we're going to have the same height and width when we create a square. I'm going to use the max function now, and this will pick the larger of these two values, either 150 pixels or 20 viewport units. So it will continue to grow as the page window gets bigger. Okay, with our variables now defined, I want to come down to the class, and let me highlight an area here. We had general styles. I'll take this comment as well, so we can comment before we begin the square. And if there were other features for our app, this is the area that I would put them, and I might say features right here. You also might comment each individual feature if you wanted to. I'll just say features for now, and we'll put in our square class. So we'll start out with a background dash color. Here we can use our var, 2 dashes, and we want to pick square background color. After that, we're going to have a width, and that would be a var, 2 dashes, and it looks like we have enough variables now we need to scroll, which is okay. We'll choose square size. Now I'm going to do Shift Alt and the down arrow because we want the same value for the height of the squares as well. Okay, after the width and the height, let's create a border. We've already got a variable for that, so we'll stick with the same border that we had previously defined. And after that border, we want a border dash radius. Here we have not defined anything, so we'll just go with 15 pixels. Then let's use a display of grid, and let's place that content in the center, so this will center our content. Let's save what we have so far. Well, that's a big difference. So now we have our squares, we have the content in each one centered, and we have a different color background as well. Just a couple more properties now for the square. So let's define a font dash size, use our var again, and now we defined an extra large font size. Let's use that. And when we save, our emojis get larger, and so does the text. Okay, let's apply a box shadow here too. I need lowercase, there we go, box shadow. And let's once again use a variable we created for shadows. There it is, and if we save, we'll get a little shadow under each square also. Now, if you remember, inside of our HTML, we also added this square highlight class. So let's go ahead and create it also. And underneath our features, I'll type square dash dash highlight, again in lowercase. And now I want to show an example of when you might redefine a variable. So we want to apply this square background color, and imagine we had all of these squares, and now we just want to overwrite one rather than having to go in and change different things about our definition for square. So this will only apply to the class square highlight, and we can change the value of this variable. So let's choose background color once again, and let's make this cornflower blue. That is an interesting name as well. And when we save, this only applies to the one square we added the square highlight class to, but we have redefined this variable for that class. Now let's add a feature that CSS Variables makes very easy to do, and it's in high demand. Let's add a dark mode in addition to our light mode that we have here. So to add a dark mode, we're just going to define a separate color theme, but we're going to do it inside of a media query. So just underneath our styles, we can put this media query towards the top. So we'll say at media, and then parentheses, we have prefers dash color dash scheme, and then we'll say dark. And then inside of this media query, let's put our root pseudo class once again. And now we can define our dark mode inside of this class. So for the BG color, and notice we're using the same variable names that we did here, so we don't have to go and change those anywhere else in our code. So we're just redefining these variables. We'll put black for the background color. Then for the alt-BG color, let's put a flat black. And then for the radial color, we'll go ahead and put in kind of a gray. Let's see if we can lighten this up any. I don't know if it will take the caps. Yep, it will. So let's try to lighten up the gray just a little bit, but we still want a gray color. Something like that. So we'll just go with that for now and we'll see how it looks. After that, let's put in the square background color. And here let's go with more like a purple, and then we'll try to lighten it up. So after we get the purple, let's come over here towards the light and something in that range. And I'm just kind of guessing, but we'll see what we get. So when we save, it switches to the dark mode. And that's because I prefer the dark mode and have my system set that way. And I'll show you how to do that. Now, if you do not prefer the dark mode, this won't go into effect. So if I just put prefers light here, just some other value, it doesn't really matter. I could put prefers Dave for all that, for anything else that would change. Essentially, it's going to ignore what's inside of here. So prefers light, and we're back to this because we prefer the dark mode, and we're already using the opposite of that. So again, like I said, I could put my name here. It doesn't make a difference. But if we put prefers dark, then it does switch to this dark mode. So now, just to show you, let's look inside. I'm on Windows. Let's look inside of the settings. I right click on the desktop and choose personalize. And then I go to colors and it says choose your color. So if I actually did prefer light mode, then the dark doesn't apply, and you can see how it even changes my window here. But I am going to set it back to dark, and our web page responds. So that is how you set up a custom dark mode with your CSS as well. So you've got your app media, prefers color scheme, and dark, and then just define your dark mode theme inside of here by overriding the other color variable values that you've already defined.